The world had already been destroyed once. Humanity lost. Heroes fell. And the strongest among them died with regret in his heart. He was the greatest hero of his era. A man who reached the peak of power, yet still failed to protect everything. At the moment of death, he wished for only one thing: a second chance. And fate answered. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer standing on a battlefield of ruin. He was young, uninjured, and standing at the beginning of everything. The Hero Academy. A place where future legends were born. A place filled with geniuses, nobles, and prodigies. A place where the weak were crushed without mercy. But this time, he was not an inexperienced student. He was a hero who had already seen the end of the world. While others trained desperately to grow stronger, he already knew the limits of their paths. While instructors tested potential, he hid his true strength carefully. Because this time, he would not shine too early. He understood the politics of the academy, the jealousy, the factions, the silent wars between nobles and commoners. Mistakes he made in his previous life would never be repeated. When conflicts arose, he resolved them efficiently. When rivals challenged him, he crushed them without revealing his full power. And when geniuses showed arrogance, he smiled quietly, because he already knew how they would fall in the future. As classes progressed, the gap slowly appeared, not in raw strength, but in mindset. He trained with purpose, every movement refined, every spell optimized. He wasn't preparing for exams. He was preparing for apocalypse. As monsters were introduced during training, fear spread among students. But to him, this was familiar. He had fought creatures far worse. Each battle confirmed it. This generation was unprepared, and that was why he would become their shield, and if necessary, their executioner. By the time rumors started spreading, it was already too late. The academy had accepted a student who carried the experience of humanity's final stand. And this time, the hero would not fail. As the days at the academy passed, Asai Kyosuke began to understand something clearly. This place was not a school. It was a battlefield disguised as education. Students were divided not only by strength, but by lineage, wealth, and influence. Nobles ruled openly. Commoners survived quietly. And Kyosuke stood outside all of it. His void attribute continued to attract ridicule. Whispers followed him through corridors. Laughter echoed during training sessions. But none of it reached his heart, because he had already endured far worse. While other students struggled to master basic techniques, Kyosuke refined his body with terrifying efficiency. He did not waste mana. He did not overtrain. Every movement served a purpose. Every breath followed a plan. In combat classes, instructors began to notice something strange. Kyosuke's stats were average, his mana output unremarkable, and yet, he never lost. When paired with stronger opponents, he avoided direct clashes. He disrupted balance. He controlled distance. Fights ended quickly, often before anyone realized how. This inconsistency unsettled the academy. Some instructors grew suspicious. Others dismissed it as luck. But among the students, tension began to rise. A noble prodigy finally stepped forward, determined to crush the void trash publicly. The duel drew a crowd. Everyone expected humiliation. Instead, they witnessed silence. Kyosuke did not overpower his opponent. He dismantled him. Every attack was predicted, every opening exploited, every counter precise. The noble fell, not defeated by power, but by understanding. For the first time, the academy fell quiet. Rumors changed tone. Mockery turned into caution. Caution turned into fear. Still, Kyosuke did not celebrate. because strength displayed too early invited unnecessary enemies. Behind the scenes, he began preparing for something far more dangerous. He knew the future. He knew which students would become monsters, which instructors would betray humanity, which events would push the world closer to collapse. And he knew that the academy itself was only the beginning. During dungeon simulations, students panicked under pressure, but Kyosuke moved calmly through chaos. To him, monsters were familiar. Death was routine. While others fought to survive, he fought to optimize. Even instructors struggled to keep up with his decision-making. At night, while the academy slept, Kyosuke trained alone. Not for grades, not for recognition, but to surpass the hero he once was. His void attributes slowly awakened, absorbing and adapting to everything it encountered. Power without shape, potential without limits. By the end of the term, one truth had become undeniable. Asai Kyosuke was no longer an overlooked student. He was an anomaly, and somewhere beyond the academy walls, fate had begun to move. The same fate that once destroyed the world was now approaching again. As the academy entered a new phase, the atmosphere began to change. Training was no longer about basics. It was about survival. Advanced combat drills were introduced, and the line between practice and real battle started to blur. For most students, this was terrifying. For Asai Kyosuke, it was familiar. He recognized the pattern immediately. This was the stage where talent was separated from failure, where weak wills collapsed, and strong egos were shattered. During group missions, students were forced to cooperate, and that was where problems began. Nobles demanded authority. Commoners followed reluctantly. Egos clashed harder than weapons. Kyosuke stayed silent. He observed. He had once led heroes. He knew exactly how teams failed. When monsters overwhelmed the group, panic spread. Orders contradicted each other. Formation broke. Fear took control. That was when Kyosuke stepped forward. Without shouting, without hesitation. His instructions were simple, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. To everyone's shock, they worked. The group stabilized. Casualties were avoided. The mission was cleared efficiently. From that moment, something shifted. Students began looking to Kyosuke, even before instructors intervened. Not because of strength, but because of trust. Behind the scenes, the academy started re-evaluating him. Reports were written. Instructors exchanged glances. This was not normal growth. Meanwhile, Kyosuke sensed something far more troubling. The monsters appearing in training were stronger than they should have been. Their behavior, too coordinated, too intelligent. He remembered this. In his previous life, this was the beginning of a chain reaction that led to catastrophe. Someone was interfering during a high-risk dungeon exercise. That suspicion became certainty. A monster variant appeared, one that should not exist yet. Students panicked. Instructors moved to evacuate. Kyosuke did not retreat. He understood the creature's structure, its weaknesses, and the future consequences of letting it live. The battle was brutal. He pushed his void attribute further than ever before, absorbing pressure, adapting instantly, turning instability into power. When the monster finally fell, silence followed, not relief, shock, because Kyosuke was injured, yet standing, alive, and stronger. The academy could no longer ignore him. But Kyosuke was already looking beyond it. Because if the timeline was accelerating, then the true disasters would arrive sooner. And this time, he would be ready. The academy could no longer pretend that Asai Kyosuke was normal. From that moment on, every evaluation, every mission, every assignment, quietly revolved around him. Not openly, Not officially, but eyes followed his movements. Instructors tested him with subtle pressure. Harder opponents. Unfair matchups. Situations designed to force mistakes. Kyosuke noticed immediately, and allowed it, because pressure was exactly what he needed. As training intensified, the gap between students widened beyond repair. Some rose. Many stagnated. Others broke completely. Kyosuke continued to advance at a terrifying pace. Not explosively, but steadily. Every battle refined his void attribute. It no longer felt empty. It felt hungry. During an academy-wide practical exam, teams were sent into a large-scale simulated battlefield. This time, failure meant expulsion. Panic returned. Old rivalries resurfaced. Leadership collapsed under stress. Once again, Kyosuke found himself surrounded by chaos. And once again, he took control. Without authority, without title, his decisions were calm, precise, and backed by undeniable results. Ambushes were predicted. Traps were reversed. Enemies were eliminated before they could coordinate. By the time instructors intervened, the exam was already over. Kyosuke's team stood untouched. The academy was shaken. For the first time, his name was discussed in private meetings. Among senior faculty, some were impressed, others were afraid, because Kyosuke's growth did not follow any known model. Meanwhile, outside the academy, the world was beginning to stir. Dungeons were activating earlier than expected. Monster outbreaks increased in frequency. Kyosuke felt it clearly. The timeline was accelerating. The catastrophe he remembered was drawing closer. During a secret advanced training session, Kyosuke encountered something dangerous. An experimental trial. Unofficial. Hidden even from students. A test designed to push limits. Several students panicked immediately. One was seriously injured. Kyosuke stepped in. He unleashed his void without restraint. For a brief moment, even the instructors felt pressure. The trial ended abruptly, and silence followed. That night, Kyosuke stood alone, staring at the academy lights. This place had trained heroes, but it had also failed them. And this time, he would not allow history to repeat itself. Whether the academy liked it or not, Asai Kyosuke was no longer a student being tested. He was a variable that could no longer be controlled. And the world beyond the walls was about to feel his influence. The academy was no longer preparing students. It was preparing for war. Emergency notices were issued. Classes were suspended. Combat formations replaced lectures. A dungeon had appeared far earlier than predicted. And it was not a normal one. Its mana density was unstable. Its structure was collapsing inward. A catastrophe-type dungeon. Senior students were mobilized. Instructors led the charge. But Kyosuke already knew the truth. This dungeon was never meant to be cleared. It was meant to break heroes. Inside the dungeon, panic spread almost instantly. The terrain shifted without warning. Monsters spawned endlessly. Teams were separated. Screams echoed through the darkness. Kyosuke moved alone. Not because he was abandoned, but because he chose to be. Each step forward, his void expanded. Enemies did not explode. They disappeared, erased without sound. At the dungeon's core, something waited. A being that should not exist. At this point in time. A proto-calamity. Incomplete, but intelligent. It spoke, not in words, but in pressure. Fear paralyzed even veteran instructors. Kyosuke stepped forward. This time, he did not hold back. The void answered fully. For the first time since his rebirth, Kyosuke crossed a line. The space around him collapsed inward. Mana ceased to flow. The entity screamed, as its existence was devoured piece by piece. When it ended, The dungeon began to crumble. Kyosuke carried injured students out himself. Bloodied, silent, uncelebrated. By the time the academy recovered, the truth could no longer be hidden. Asai Kyosuke was not a prodigy. He was not a genius. He was a necessary anomaly. In an emergency council, a decision was made. Kyosuke would be removed from standard education. Not expelled, not promoted, but released. From rules, from curriculum, from supervision, because no system could contain him. On the night before his departure, Kyosuke stood at the academy gates. This place had given him tools. But the real battlefield was waiting outside. The world was changing faster now. And this time, he would move first. Asai Kyosuke stepped forward, not as a student, not as a hero, but as someone who remembered how the world ends, and intended to rewrite it.